Yeah, come on. If you want them off there, let them off in there before we
Okay, we're ready to go. If you could please first introduce yourself.
My name is Barzel. I live in Plymouth, Massachusetts with my wife, Ada, and we are supporters of the community in Plymouth that operates the Yellow Deli restaurant that you're now seeing pictures of. We have been in this town, I've lived in Plymouth on and off 20 years. I was a history tour director for a while and got familiar with some of the early New England stories and learned a little bit about Roger Williams. And over the years, we've accumulated more understanding about this remarkable man, and we dedicated this room to his memory and honor. He was a teacher in the Church of Plymouth for 2 years in 1630 and 31. And by that role, he learned certain things that marked his career for the rest of his life until the 1680s in New England. And we want to honor what we understand about him spiritually and socially. This scene here on the wall before you is the English countryside of Essex County, where Williams was a chaplain for a couple of years, working for a Puritan nobleman who owned land there. And there he considered his future, but he was recognizing that England didn't have a future for him. He was too radical. The currents of England were moving against freedom in 1631, and he, in order to escape the inevitable persecution, he fled to Boston in 1630. And he was on and off in conflict with the authorities in Boston, as this painting reveals. He had a belief in him that there were limits to the power of church and state, that the church needed to be separate from the state in all its details. This was unheard of in Europe, and it was unheard of in New England, the Massachusetts Bay Company. They had a formal separation of church and state in that leaders of the church couldn't hold political office and vice versa. But the state worked very closely with religion. The first people executed for anything in Boston were executed for breaking the Sabbath in 1634. So there was a serious authority about religion that is exercised by the state, and Williams felt that was improper.
It was the Sunday Sabbath.
Sunday Sabbath. And so he opposed that, and he had problems, as I told you earlier, I mentioned earlier in the discussion. The charter of the Massachusetts Bay Company was written specifically to limit its authority if it came in conflict with the authority of other Christian kings, normally assumed to be the kings of Spain and France, who had holdings in North America. There was a good political sense on the part of King Charles who issued the charter, and it was all accepted. Nobody thought anything of it. But Williams looked at it and said, what about the Indian kings? They exist, they have authority, they take care of their land like according to English law, ordinary people do. And they have a right to their land as much as any European king. So there should be recognition of that in the charter. And you should send the charter back because it's a lie. The King of England doesn't have authority to grant that charter. And the authorities in Boston felt like that was dangerous. And they never forgave him for it. In 1636, they put him on trial for holding such ideas that the church should not be informing the state as to what people should believe or not believe. They should hold the you should hold it had to do with Williams viewing the Indians as equal human rights to their land. It went against the understanding they had of being the elect. And he had understanding of the limits of power for the civil government. All these things marked him out as a dangerous heretic. So in 1636, they found him guilty of to the native peoples. He had built a relationship with the Wampanoag in the earlier years, 1630 to 1634, and he was known to the Narragansetts. But in 1636, winter of 1636, he was banished. He had to flee from being arrested and deported forcibly to England to face trial as a heretic. The people that hated Archbishop Laud were going to hand him over to the bishop they knew would harshly treat him. And some native person found him sick and alone in the woods of New England in the middle of a snowstorm and brought him home to them and nursed him back to health. And he acquired a debt of friendship that he never sought to repay as a public citizen. You see a picture there?
Yes.
And in 1636, he was able to go up. He started off in the land westernmost coast of Massachusetts by New Bedford, and he started out there. And the people of Plymouth told him he was too close to their land, and he couldn't settle there. The Indians told him he could, but the English said he couldn't. So he pulled stakes and moved to Narragansett Bay, the head of Narragansett Bay, to what we now know as Providence, Rhode Island. And there he was given land by the Narragansetts, who recognized him as being a remarkable individual that they needed to keep the friendship of. Then, starting in 1636, a small number of people that wanted their own views about religion to be respected came to Rhode Island, and they found a civil government that had no claim for any religious truth. It was the only civil government in the world that made no establishment of church. Holland believed in religious freedom. You could believe anything you wanted to in Holland. If there was a state church, it was taxpayer supported. There was no such thing in Rhode Island. If you go to New England, you'll see the traditional New England village has a town green in the center of the village with church buildings along it, as well as town buildings. And the way they laid it out, the church and the town government were often usually in the same building. And it was a shared relationship that was understood and accepted. But those villages don't exist in Rhode Island because that relationship was never there. And let's move over to this picture.
Okay. A peacemaker.
In 1636, the Pequot Nation in Connecticut had been reserved in its relationship with the Massachusetts Bay. And in the process, a trader known to the English and to the Indians was murdered off of Block Island, an island off the coast of Rhode Island. And the people of Massachusetts...
Are you saying a trader of goods?
A trader of goods.
A trader.
And a trader of goods. And the people of Massachusetts Bay wanted revenge. And they declared war on the Pequot people and basically provoked a war with them. And Williams was not consulted in any of this. But what the Pequot did is they realized very quickly the armor and weaponry of the English was no match for them. But they saw that they could overcome them with native tactics. And they appealed to the Narragansetts to join them. In 1636, New England was not yet settled. Massachusetts Bay was not yet established. Had the Narragansetts joined the Pequot and did the sort of war that would follow in 1675, a generation later, it could have worked. It could have driven the English into the sea. But Williams knew that wouldn't end it. Williams understood that if England was defeated, they wouldn't quit going to New England. They would never forgive or forget that defeat. And they would gather their forces and come back. But it would be a different New England than the one that was there in the 1630s. He saw that the best outcome for the Narragansetts would be to side with the English and avoid that war. So, how to do it? He was asked by the Massachusetts Bay Colony leaders, the same ones that were going to send him to his death.
Right.
They asked him for their help. He agreed to do it. He took a canoe, 40 miles of open water on a canoe, to get to the gathering place in the Narragansett, he was in a building structure with over 1,000 natives. And he was in their council, invited there. The chief, the sachem of Narragansett, invited him there. He was the only Englishman probably alive who could be in that gathering, could understand their language, understand the issues at stake, and speak in a way that could be heard as wisdom. He spoke in that gathering and persuaded the Narragansetts to not side with the Pequot, their ancient enemies, but to side with the English. And Williams would live the rest of his life, the next 45 years, trying to keep that relationship good and keep the Narragansetts independent. But so that relationship was key, and it was a decisive moment in colonial history.
And he supported the colonists after they turned against him. He supported them after they turned against him because he had the larger picture, could one say.
Yeah, he saw the whole thing. But the tension between Massachusetts Bay and Rhode Island didn't go away. In the 1640s, Williams discovered they were making plans on seizing the land of the Rhode Island that was not claimed by any European powers. They were going to take it by their own charters that they would write themselves. And by that point, England was in civil war. So who could protect Providence from Massachusetts Bay? Massachusetts Bay had a military force. They could take the land, but they were doing it legally. They were sending people to London to get the authority to do it. So his neighbors said to Williams, "Go to London and see what you can do for us." Now, 5 years earlier, he had been a prisoner.
Right.
But, King Charles was on the run. England was in civil war. He was going to go to London, see if he could find his old friends, and work something out. But why should they listen to him? Why should these men gripped with a life and death issue politically, capturing the whole nation? Why should they pay attention to a former chaplain and an exile from their religious allies in New England? There's a picture, you can get it later. It's in a corner there. It's a picture of a book called The Key to the Language of America.
Okay.
It's a very small book. You can go over and get the picture of it. The Key to the Language of America was a book he wrote on the way over to England. It was based on the culture, his long-standing relationship with the Narragansetts. He developed over the previous year or so. He learned their culture, learned their language, learned their ways. He wrote a book. It was a phrase book, but in it was all kinds of behaviors. It was a cultural snapshot of the Narragansett culture on the eve of being immersed by the Europeans. It's still read by anthropologists. It is a remarkable statement. He saw them as human beings. And it's a very small book. It was published, it sold out when he got to London in 1642. He sold out in a few months. And became a bestseller in wartime London. And all the people who were concerned about colonial affairs recognized that Williams was somebody to listen to.
Why is it significant that you said that he saw them as human beings? Why was that a significant thing?
So many people wondered if Indians had souls. There were people that viewed they were savages that should be wiped out. There's quite a bit of prejudice amongst many Englishmen, especially those in the colonies themselves. London wasn't full of such hostility. There were people there that were willing to hear something different, but nobody was speaking it. He was the only one to say it. And by doing that, he made a striking impression on the people that had power. And they gave a charter, a protection to Rhode Island from Parliament that Boston didn't dare challenge. And that kept the independence of Rhode Island until 1660, when Charles II took the throne and the politics reverted back to the King of England.
Now, there was a very monumental event that happened in England at that time that he did. Can you tell us that story?
Well, that book there, 1644. Williams wrote it while he was in London. Parliament needed help. The King of England controlled the coal fields of Newcastle, and the fuel supply for winter in London was in the enemy hands of the king. And what it is, he was forcing London to freeze, and the people of London were in trouble. And William